Welcome back everybody, and thanks for joining me again for another HTML CSS tutorial. Today we're learning about responsive design. In other words, how to make a web page that automatically adjusts to look correctly on any screen size, whether it be desktop, tablet, phone, or whatever. We're going to use the same project that we used for our multimedia assignment. So in our Web 1 folder, if you find those files, the index, the styles, those folders and everything, we are going to copy those, and then in our Web 1 projects folder we're going to make a folder that is called responsive, and then we'll just paste these asset files into there, and that's where we'll work out of for this. So we've already done all the work of the HTML and the CSS. Now it's time to make it look nice on any screen size. In your text editor, we'll go to open, and we want to find our responsive folder on here, and we do want to open up the index and the styles. We should just need the styles, but you never know, so we'll open up the index just in case. So if we open up our page also in a browser and take a look at it, we'll see that there is some responsiveness already. These images all fit in there nicely and everything, but there are a few things that I think could be better. Once we get to this size, we start seeing our heading texture or our heading text slide outside of the page box, which we don't want. We also would like to do something with the nav menu to make it a little bit easier to use on mobile devices. This small image in here is a little bit too small to see, so we'd like to do something about that. Our audio is too small to really move with the timeline in there. That size works good for a tablet, but not so much for a mobile device. Our slideshow also could cause problems on mobile devices. Sometimes slideshows take longer to show up, might make the page a little slower or a little glitchy, so I think we could actually remove that altogether, and with all those things we can make our page a little bit better. Also, when the page is big, this is a little too wide, so that might be something that we play around with also. So let's go ahead and get to our CSS, and the first thing we can do is fix that issue where everything is too big. So like in our page box up here, we can go max-width, and we could say something like 800 pixels. And if I save that and I go back here to this and I refresh this, now my screen looks a little bit better. 800 might be a little bit on the small size, so let's go back here and let's try 900. Alright, I think that looks a little bit better. You can adjust yours accordingly, but that way it kind of keeps everything proportionate on our page, and some of these images don't look quite so big on the wide screen. Alright, so that's the first thing that we can do there, is just right in that page box element. For the rest, we're going to scroll down to the very bottom, and we actually have a responsive element already in here. And this is from our slideshow content that we pasted in for our project. And so down here it says on smaller screens decrease text size. We're actually going to remove that. We don't need that part in there because we're going to create our own media query. So we'll delete that out, and then we'll scroll down to the very bottom, and this is where I like to put in this information. Now when we're talking about media queries, we can do an internet search for popular media query sizes, and here I found this one at freecodecamp.org. This is something you could use as a guideline. It's kind of up to you, but in here it's like, alright, there's these like 1201 pixels and more is for very large views. Then they have one here for desktop, small screens, iPads, and mobile device. Kind of up to you on how many of these you want to make. I usually figure that my regular website view is the desktop view, so that counts as one, and then I have something for tablets, and then I have something for mobile device. But it's ultimately up to you and your client on what they want you to create. So those, again, only a Google search away, and sometimes there's no one common phone size, so you can actually find media queries for specific phone types online also. So for ours here, we're going to go at media space only space screen space and space, and then we'll put in our parentheses in here, and we're going to go max hyphen width colon and then a space, and we'll go 834 px, and then we have this parentheses closed right here. I'm going to open up my fancy bracket right there, and then I'll press return. And one thing that I think I might try is making that H1 text smaller. So I'm going to make this new rule. So I'm going to go H1 and then my fancy bracket on here, and I'm going to go font hyphen size, and let's try 42 px semicolon, and then I will close this fancy bracket, and then I also need to close this fancy bracket up here. Alright, so I'll press Control S to save, and now I'm going to refresh my page here, and if I change the size of this, we can see multimedia fans. Right once it gets about here, it does wrap, but then once it gets a little bit smaller, then our text is a little bit smaller, and actually that fits in there pretty nicely. So multimedia fans, I think that'll work. You can play around with the size of it, but no matter what, on what screen size, that's going to fit in there nicely. So that works pretty good. The next thing that I wanted to do for a tablet size was I wanted to hide my slideshow. So what I'll do here is just go underneath here between these two curved brackets, and in here we used an ID for that. So # slideshow, that's what we called that section that had our slideshow in it. And in here we'll go display none semicolon. Alright, and now if I refresh this, here's our slideshow. We see it works there and everything. Now once it gets to a certain size, it hides that entire section. So kind of when I think like the smaller the screen size you get, what's the most essential things on there? You might want your slideshow on there. Maybe there's something else you don't want, and then you can kind of adjust that as necessary. So that works good for my tablet. Then what I can do is I will just copy this and paste it underneath. And my next one, I'm just going to make a smaller size. I'm not going to go quite phone size, so that way I can adjust to it easily in my browser still, just for illustrative purposes. But I'll go 568 pixels for the max width. And the H1 on here, I can remove this part out of there, and then I can remove this part out of there. Alright, so what I can work on with this, maybe the first one is going to be the page box. So I'm going to go dot page box, and then I'll put my fancy brackets here, and I'm going to make it a little bit wider. I don't need such a big margin on the outside of the page box when it's a mobile device. So I can go width is 90%. Alright, and now when I refresh this, here this is, when I get small, see? Right there you can tell where it just snaps into place. Isn't that cool? I think it's cool. Alright, so we have dot page box done. Another thing we can do in there, we don't need to worry about the margin because they are already auto, But with that top nav, that's something I want to play around with. So I'm going to use dot top nav, and I'll put my fancy brackets in here, and I'm going to go width of 100%, and then I'm going to press enter, overflow hidden, padding none, and that one is closed. And then after that I can put in there my dot top nav space A with my fancy brackets in there, and then I'm gonna say each of those is going to be 100%, and the display is going to be block, and text align is going to be center, background color is going to be $0000000. I'm going to give them a border, so I'm going to go border hyphen style is going to be solid, and border hyphen width is going to be 1px, and border hyphen color is going to be $323232. Alright, and I'll save that. These, you might not necessarily need all of these depending on what you're trying to do, so you can kind of tweak those, play around with them. But let's see what it looks like right now in that setting. Alright, and then we'll shrink it down. And here we go. We have the page. This is regular view. Right here is where we get to our tablet view. And then once we get smaller, this expands out. And now we have like a nav menu that might be a little bit easier for someone to use on a phone if they're holding their phone with one hand to navigate through that way. Okay, next thing we have this picture on here. I think we can fix that and make that look a little nicer. So after the border color, we can go to dot small pic is what we used, and we'll go width of 100%. And let's save that and check this out in here. Yeah, so there's that. Before it gets too small, then we kind of go into this mode here where it's easier to see. So I think that looks good. Then the last thing that I want to fix is this sound. So underneath here, we can go audio, and then width is 100%. If I refresh this again, now that goes to the end. And there it is. That's a responsive web page. So I think it's important to have a max width for your page box so it doesn't get too huge on the screen. You know, there are probably some exceptions, but for the most part, we want to keep in mind that. And then if I shrink this down to tablet view, and especially if we look at the slideshow disappears. We also have our text that now fits in here a little bit easier. And then if I shrink this down further, we get into this mobile device view where we have the wider screen, the smaller margins. This nav menu works a lot easier. The small picture looks good, and then our sound gets there also. And there it is. So that's a responsive web page. Totally changes the way you design. And now that you kind of know this, it's not a bad idea when you start creating your pages to start designing with that mobile first mentality. Like here, this is what most people are going to see my web page the first time. Is this going to be something that they find engaging, or are they going to get frustrated with it and leave? And then once you kind of have that done, then it's easier to know how it's going to play into the full desktop mode. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you have questions. I appreciate you watching, and we'll talk to you another time.